How do you describe Nebula One in a way that CIOs, CTOs, and university leaders immediately understand?
Until they see it, they sometimes don't understand it. It's like an AI gateway that you can connect to any model for any reason.
So, you've worked closely with large, complex organisations from federal government to education and then enterprise. What have been the defining leadership challenges when guiding organisations through transformation?
I was doing work with Amazon, doing work with Google, Oracle, Microsoft, and there was a couple things about Microsoft that stood out. AI is not, a magical magician in a box that's just going to come and fix all your business problems the minute that you introduce it. It actually, to be honest, can create new problems if it's not handled appropriately.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Beyond Zenith. This is our first podcast episode, and I am beyond excited to be introducing our very first guest today. So, this individual has a journey that genuinely stands out. From a young age, he was technically curious, taking things apart, building websites by middle school, and stepping into consultancy before most people have figured out their first career move. In 2010, he took the brave leap to build his own company, and what began as a boutique engineering outfit has grown into a high performing cloud consultancy that is recognized across the industry. Cloudforce ended 2024 with a rare triple crown, winning three major workplace culture awards in the same year. And in 2025 was named Microsoft Education Partner of the Year. Please welcome the CEO, Husein Sharaf. Husein, very excited and honored to have you on today. How are you? I know you've had an amazing career, amazing year. How's it all going?
I am ready for the holidays. I am ready to take a brief break, hopefully for the new year. But I'm great. I'm doing
How,
great.
how do you keep on going? Like your energy, you're always at conferences. Like, how do you keep up with it?
Honestly, a lot of coffee and a lot of exercise every morning, no matter what, wherever I am in the world. I force myself to get up early and go to the hotel gym, no matter how bad it is. Actually, yesterday I was in Denver and I was up at 5 to use their. It was a decent gym. It was okay. Thankfully, in our office here in National Harbor, we've got a nice gym that we built out. So that's what keeps me going.
Yeah, it's good that you do that, all beneficial for your health and very good discipline there. So before we get into your journey, I just wanted to start off with something a bit light. Do you still consider yourself a hands-on engineer at heart, or have you fully stepped into the CEO mindset?
I don't think I'll ever step fully into the CEO mindset. I'm not sure what that actually is, to be honest. Um, for a long time, I actually avoided the title CEO, so I didn't actually take the CEO title until maybe 10 years into having the business. And part of that was I wanted to keep the chief technology officer title because that's what I love to do is to tinker and build things. And even today, I think, especially with AI, I've gotten a lot more hands on again. So for a while, I was mostly working with Microsoft, working with our customers, and not really doing a whole lot of building. But in the last 3 years, I've definitely enjoyed getting my hands dirty again and actually building things because you can just do it so much easier now and so much faster and so much more sort of direct to an output in the same sitting. I've been really enjoying building.
So do you feel that your background has really shaped the success and growth of your company?
I mean, it's hard to take credit for what we've built. I think that some of the experiences that I've had in other companies definitely helped to shape the culture that we built, and mostly just learning what not to do. I think we've all worked for terrible bosses or companies that felt cold and soulless, and so one of the things that we were very intentional about in the early days was, what is the company that we don't want to be, and who is the company that we do want to be. I think it's easier to, talk about what you don't want to be, but it's hard to figure out what you do want to be, and that took some time. But we thankfully avoided a lot of the pitfalls of the big soulless consulting firms that I used to work for.
And then can you take us back to the beginning? So you grew up in Fairfax. What would you say first sparked your interest in technology? And then how did that early environment shape your ambition?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was a pretty curious kid just by nature. So one of the things that sparked my interest early on was anything with a motor or wheels. So I got into dirt bikes as a kid. I didn't have one because I couldn't afford one, but a friend of mine did. So we would wrench on his old beat up Honda. Um, Lawnmowers, anything that had gasoline and an exhaust, I was into, and I wanted to take it apart and put it back together. That evolved into PCs. About, I don't know, 7 or 8 years old, I was ripping apart PCs and putting them together, and other electronics. So I think I was just curious, and I had a lot of time and spent a lot of time alone. So I was a pretty introverted kid. I didn't spend a ton of time with a lot of people, and so that just gave me a lot of time to tinker.
How did that early environment, like that curiosity of with technology, shape your ambition today, would you say?
I think it just um, sort of taught me that it doesn't really take a, uh, a subject matter expert to build things, right? Like early on, I figured out that I could actually make things better, I could improve things, and I didn't have to have, some special skill or a fancy degree to figure things out. And I think that that's also shaped the type of people that we hire here. So, some of us in the company do have a fancy degree. I'm not one of them, but that's definitely not what we index on when we're recruiting. I think what we really look for are people that are curious, that are willing to take risks, that are willing to fail. And that has definitely impacted not only the culture, but also the types of services and products that we're able to provide.
And then I know that you entered the technology world incredibly early. So you jumped into roles at Booz Allen, Quest, and then later Nest. What were the pivotal lessons from those early engineering and architecture roles that still influence your leadership today?
Yeah, I mean, I think, getting into consulting at 18 years old was an interesting experience for me. I knew a lot about technology at that point, to be honest, but I didn't know anything about, corporate culture or leadership or politics. And so I learned a ton in those environments. I think the things that I took forward were, every company does certain things really well. And so, for example, working at Booz Allen, it's a big giant machine. We had over 8,000 people at our campus, but they were super efficient in the way that they did certain things like bidding for work. And so I took a lot of the lessons from just watching and observing how they were able to consistently win forward into how we run our business. And also, you know, when you're a small company competing against big companies, and we do compete against the biggest consultancies in the world now, um, you have to sort of be a bit more mature than your scale would imply. And so I think we, collectively, but myself, I took a lot of the maturity lessons from some of those bigger companies and tried to apply them in ways that would make us appear maybe a little bit bigger or more mature than we were, especially in the early days. And I think that helped us to win trust and to win business.
Yeah, it's probably really good to be in that environment, especially so young, because then you can kind of see maybe all the do's and don'ts and then refine it for the future.
There was definitely a lot of don'ts, but there was a handful of do's as well. I think, again, every company has certain things that they excel at. And even the smaller consultancies that I worked for, I didn't really love their lack of structure, but I liked the culture aspect of what they were doing. And so there are certain things that I could take from the smaller companies as well.
That's good. And then you blend it into what is the powerhouse today.
Yeah, that was the goal anyway. So hopefully we're succeeding at that.
Well, I mean, your awards are saying you are, so I'm sure you definitely are. So you progressed quickly through complex environments. So you went from system engineering to enterprise architecture in federal agencies. How would you say that when you navigated those transitions, what did they teach you about problem solving at large scale or sort of mission critical problems?
Yeah, I mean, I think working on some pretty high profile systems early in career, um, you learn some lessons, some hard lessons, especially when something goes down or breaks, and you have thousands or millions of people that could be impacted by something not working. Um, you definitely learn to measure three times and cut once. You learn to read the manual sometimes, even though no technologist ever wants to read the manual for anything. We also all struggle with asking for help. So there's certain situations where you should call support. Nobody ever wants to call support, but there are situations where you just need to bite the bullet and call support. So there's a lot of lessons around just the care that is required when you have sort of the responsibility over something important. So in early in my career, I was working on federal government systems that were public facing. So literally every citizen in the country could use these systems, and they were live on the public internet. And so if one of them went down, we heard about it very fast. There was a lot of eyeballs on some of the things that we were working on, and so it didn't matter if it was 3 a.m. on New Year's Eve. I was getting a call if something wasn't working, and so I always had to be on my toes. I always had to be prepared for that call, and there was many a night where I jumped in the car in the middle of the night and drove to the data center and just figured it out.
Wow. So have you've always had a passion for it?
I think there's both sort of risk with running systems like that, but also a thrill that comes with being able to build and fix them. So the sense of accomplishment when something big comes together and works well and people like it and it's being used by tons and tons of people efficiently at scale across the entire country or across the entire world. It's pretty cool to be able to say that you built something or contributed to building something like that.
And then do you remember at all, like the worst situation that happened across any of those previous companies at all?
Yeah, actually, this story I tell every now and then because it's pretty funny. So we were running a data center in Virginia for a federal agency. I won't name it. And we had a new leader that came into the business. And my job was essentially to help run and maintain this data center. And we had a power outage. And so pretty much everybody that was running this data center got called in at night to try to figure out what to do because the generators were not coming online. And we had enough battery backup to run for a short period of time, but we all knew that as soon as those batteries were out, everything was going to turn off. It was going to be lights out, and it was going to be a really bad night, day, week, month. We had hundreds and hundreds of systems running in this data center, and so there I am in the middle of the night with my new boss, and he's looking at me, and I'm looking at him, and I'm like, listen, I'm not in charge of the facilities, like the maintenance and the power. That's not my role here. So he opens a panel and he's looking at all these switches and he's trying to figure out how to switch over to the generator power. And there's one big giant switch, and it looked like the right switch, but we're looking at the manual, we're looking at the switch, and he's like, should I do it? And I'm like, I don't think so. And I was like, I wouldn't do it. And he flips the switch and lights out. The whole place goes dark. And so it was obviously the wrong switch, and we didn't have the right people in the room. And with new leadership, sometimes mistakes happen, and they don't necessarily know who to call. Um, and it was a really bad night, and it was a really bad week. But that situation, I think, taught me something, and also taught everybody there a few things. And I think it was more around just bad things are going to happen. IT doesn't always work. People make mistakes, and I think the most important thing is how you sort of recover and behave in those situations. Like, we could have all pointed a finger and said, this is your problem, this is your fault, and let him deal with it. But essentially, we all just rolled up our sleeves, stayed there all night, worked, I don't even know, 48 hours straight to try to bring everything back online. And nobody pointed a finger, and nobody made anybody feel bad. And it was fine. There were some angry people for a few weeks, and then everyone forgot about it. So stuff happens.
Sounds like a lovely blameless culture.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, we try to do that here at Cloudforce. people make mistakes. We encourage experimentation. We encourage people to, sometimes go out on a limb. We don't encourage people to be reckless with systems. So let me just clarify that, like, I wouldn't tell anybody here to flip the switch without knowing what it does. So definitely care, but stuff happens. It's IT. It's never going to work perfectly. And whether you're, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, stuff breaks.
Yeah, and from the mistakes, it's always lessons, and I think that's why people like to work with people that have the experience, because it's just another one under your belt, and you know how to deal with the situation in the future. Out of curiosity, did you ever find out what the root of the cause was for that?
Yeah, so it turns out there was a faulty, there's like an automatic switch that was supposed to have flipped over. It didn't because it was just defective. And so there was nothing that we could have done. Ultimately, it was going to fail anyways. It was just going to be a matter of time before the batteries ran out and it was going to fail. So, um, you know, it is what it is. Stuff happens.
Indeed, it sounds like it brought you all closer together. So eventually, you made the leap from employee to entrepreneur. Do you remember that moment, like when you decided, right, this is it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it wasn't like a one aha moment for me. It was a transition over time. Thankfully, I had a great job, and I was able to start a business sort of at night and on the weekends, and slowly sort of build that business up over time and build the confidence that the business would be sustainable. There was a moment towards the end where I was kind of teetering of like, should I quit my full time job and go all in on this thing? And I did have a boss that was not the best, and she made things really difficult for me, and which was strange for me because prior to that point, every boss I'd had loved me because I was the one that would always like, you know, do double the work for half the pay. Um, and I was just always a workaholic, and I was always trying to please. But this particular manager didn't like me, I think, on a personal level, and so she made my life very difficult. And there was one incident one day where we kind of got into it in the office, and I'm like, all right, that's it, I'm done. I need to actually set a plan to do the transition fully, and I did, and I never looked back. Although it was at the time still pretty scary because um, I was making good money, uh, not great money, but good enough to survive and to pay all my bills and to support my family. And so it was a big deal to let that go.
Yeah. I mean, it obviously doesn't sound nice that you had that with your manager, but then also, I guess maybe Cloudforce wouldn't have started in 2010 potentially if that didn't happen. So,
Yeah, honestly, I feel like I should find her and send her like a gift basket or something and be like, thank you for treating me so poorly, because otherwise I might have stayed.
and then at that time, was there anything that you sort of saw in the industry that made you know that kind of Cloudforce was going to be successful, or it was the right time to build something like that?
I think the first time I used a cloud-based system, and it was, to be honest, it was Amazon AWS, because that was pretty much the only thing out at the time. Uh, I compared that experience of spinning up a system in the cloud versus, creating a system in a data center, a physical system, and it was just not even comparable. Like what would take us 2 or 3 months to procure physical servers and switches and storage and all this stuff that we had to buy and then wait for it to show up and then cable it and then install the operating system and troubleshoot why it wasn't working and then get an actual application online. You could do that in 20 minutes in the cloud. And so, and at a price that was, wildly cheaper than what we were spending to build systems in the data center. And so when I sort of compare that experience, like nobody's going to want to run a data center as soon as this becomes more widespread. And so I was pretty early in that thinking, I think, because when I shared that idea with others, everyone's like, no, that's crazy. No one's ever going to put all their stuff in the cloud. Why would we ever trust, Amazon with our data or whoever with our data? That's never going to happen. But I kind of saw the writing on the wall that eventually, like, it would be very difficult to make a case for not being in the cloud. And so, the goal was, let me start this company to help large organizations to figure out how to get to cloud and how to do it well. Um, and yeah, it was a lot of knocking on doors and getting a lot of no's in the beginning, but persistence, I guess eventually somebody said yes, and from there it kind of snowballed.
And so in the beginning, it was just yourself. I think you've mentioned that for 6 years, if that's correct.
Yeah.
Um, and so you had a few clients, I imagine, in the beginning. How did you translate that early trust into the momentum that Cloudforce is today?
Yeah, the first few customers definitely probably thought that we were a little bit bigger than we were. I mean, I was the only employee for a long period of time, but I had contractors that pulled in to help out with different sort of skill sets. So definitely appeared to be a little bit more mature and larger than we were. But the key thing was we just didn't let any of these customers down. So regardless of what the situation was, even if we had to do crazy things to keep systems online and to get projects done on time, you just do what you have to do. And so I think early on, just building a reputation with customers to say, okay, well, we hired this company to do something. They said that they would do it within this period of time for this price, and they got it done on time, on budget, and everybody's happy with the result. And to get customers that are willing to share that story was, I think, the key. So thankfully, I had some great early customers that were, super happy with our work and were willing to share that story with others, and would allow us to write case studies and white papers and success stories about the work. And from there, it was all referrals and word of mouth that actually sort of brought business inbound to us.
And did it feel very different having your own company going from, sort of big companies?
Yeah, it was definitely different to have to be sort of in charge of everything all the time. I think a mistake that I made that I see most entrepreneurs make is to assume that just because you can do one thing really well, that you can start a business that does that thing. Because turns out, you know, I did engineering well, but I didn't know the first thing about legal or finance or taxes or compliance or the 50 other things that you have to learn to run a business. And so that was definitely a challenge early on, is trying to figure out how to do those things, or at least bring in some help to do some of those things. And I think part of our success was knowing where my real weaknesses were early and saying, like, I'm not even going to try to do accounting. Like, that's just not something I'm going to attempt. I'm going to find somebody that can help part-time and eventually full-time. So that was probably the biggest challenge early on.
And is there anything that you know now that you would do differently if you were to go back and speak to your younger self?
Oh, like a thousand things. Where do I start? Let me get the list.
Do
Um,
you feel that if they didn't happen, then maybe you wouldn't have had the lessons and
yeah, I mean, I try not to ever regret anything because I think it all sort of brought us to this moment, which is great. There are probably a few things that I would do differently. Mainly, and I actually, funny thing, I told you this when I was in the UK last. Don't hire your friends. That's one lesson I learned that I would probably do differently now is, I think a lot of people have the knee jerk reaction to say, okay, well, I'm starting this thing. Who are the people that I like hanging out with the most? Let me bring them into this company so we can do it together. It'll be fun. And some parts of it were fun, but the reality is that you're never going to treat friends the same way that you would treat an employee. um, and you're likely going to make excuses for them when perhaps they don't deliver, or maybe they're just not the right person for the role in the first place, and you were sort of it was wishful thinking to think that they could do something that you weren't really sure that they could do. And so ultimately, I probably would have done that differently. It did, unfortunately, end a couple of friendships along the way, and yeah, I would not recommend.
yeah, that you have said that to me before, and I can definitely see that when working with other companies, if that ever happens, because you've got to have difficult conversations and you've got to put the business and the customer first, and not everyone aligns with that. But it's interesting that when you build a great company like yourself and a great culture, then, you know, all of the people around in your company, you all become friends and have a good environment. Because I can firsthand say the culture is amazing, and, you know, you're building something special, which is amazing to be part of it in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I think the funny thing is, we have a ton of fun in our office and just within the business. So it's not as if I don't feel like I have friends here. I've probably grown closer to a lot of our teammates than I am with my friends from prior to starting the business. But I think it's a little bit different when, you're introduced to somebody in a business setting and you build a friendship over time versus your friends first and then you introduce them to the business. I think those are two very different things. And the outcomes in terms of how you treat each other and how you sort of respect and work with each other is just different.
Yeah, no, definitely agree. And thank you for the advice. I'll definitely take it on board. So you've described Cloudforce as a people first, low ego organization. What leadership principles shape that culture from the early days? And then how have you maintained it as you scaled? Because I think that's the hardest thing I see across the sector and other industries.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the lessons that I learned as a kid, and probably most likely from my mother, was to not ask people to do things that you're not going to do. So I'm a big believer in if you're asking people to do things for you as a manager or as a leader, you should at least understand what it takes to do that thing and have tried to do it yourself or successfully delivered that thing in the past because that will really help you to understand what's realistic and what's not. So we try to always look for leaders that have done the thing and done it successfully and hopefully done it for years to the point where they really understand intimately what it takes to do it. Um, and so I think that that is a big piece of the culture here is, when things get tough or when something goes off the rails, there's nobody here in a leadership position that doesn't just jump in to help to, do the thing alongside our staff to make sure that it gets done and done well and that our customers are happy. I can't tell you how many times I get called into an issue, whether it's technical or business or otherwise, where I'm often having to stop myself from fixing the thing because I'm like, I can fix this. And I know I'm not supposed to do that all the time because it also takes, sometimes it'll take a growth opportunity away from somebody else. But I think all of us here have that sort of tug at like, okay, I know how to do this thing. I can help. I can fix it. So I think it's a double-edged sword sometimes too. Like you have to be careful how much you do that, but I do think that it's contributed to a culture where people feel like they're not being managed in a way that the person doesn't understand what they're being asked to do or creating unrealistic expectations for their role.
And then when scaling, has that been quite difficult to still keep that?
I think the most difficult thing is just finding the right people, honestly. And you're in the business of finding people, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. We are super selective about who we hire. And especially when we're going into this hyper growth phase that we've been in, over the last year and will actually accelerate into next year. If you have to hire one person in a month, you can kind of take your time and interview a lot of people and figure it out. If you have to hire 5 people in a week, it's a lot more difficult to do that and find the right people. And I think one thing that I would also sort of caution others to do is, and this is not new, but just be very careful and don't cut corners just because you need somebody. Because ultimately it will come back to bite you. And we've made that mistake a couple of times. And every time we've cut a corner or not gone through our entire process, things tend to not work out the way that we would hope. And so I would rather be running lean and running hard because we just haven't found the right person versus, hiring somebody that we don't feel like is a perfect fit for the culture.
Yeah, and I can actually say firsthand that the type of people that you hire are great in terms of their energy, but skill set and the way that you interview. Um, and so sometimes you got to pull people out if they're not right. and make a hard decision, like you said. But then in the long run, you're so much happier for it. It'd be nice if you could cut corners. I've tried that and it's never worked for me. So definitely learned not to do that again.
Yeah, and it's also not doing the candidate a favor either, right? If you hire the wrong person, it's bad for them too, right? Nobody wants to be brought into a role where they're going to fail. And so I think, you're doing your company a disservice and you're doing the candidate a disservice of not really being thorough in the process. And there's also, I hate to call them soft skills, but that's what the industry sort of calls them. I think those are probably more important as sort of upfront hurdles for people to get through our process. Is, can you communicate clearly? Are you empathetic? Are you kind? Are you the kind of person that somebody actually wants to have lunch with, have a beer with, go to a game with? Like, these things are important to us and they're important to our customers and to our partners. And so I think that's really the first hurdle that folks have to cross in order to even get to an interview here.
I know integrity is really important as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we all want to assume that everybody's honest all the time, and the truth is that that's not always the case. And you try to suss that out in the interview process, but it's not always easy. And people in tech are very smart and have a lot of ways that they can, maybe hide things or misrepresent things if they want to. And unfortunately, that's just part of the job. But you have to be diligent in understanding those things, and when you find them, you have to either kind of face them head on or remove people if you feel like they are not up to your standard for sort of morals and ethics and honesty.
Yeah. In the US market, I know it can be a bit volatile, like previously with the layoffs. So I think that doesn't contribute, or that is quite a big contributor sometimes to people maybe not having as much integrity. But I think eventually, the more you work with them down the process, what I found, it always shines through. So it's just about hopefully myself catching it before an issue happens with a client, or just dealing with it in the right way.
Yeah, and I think certain people have a skill of being able to see through
Yeah.
some of these things better than others, and I'm not one of those people, so I'm not typically involved in like the front end of the hiring process because I think everybody's great and I see a positive spin on everything. And so uh, that's probably not the best when you're trying to figure out if somebody's telling you the truth. So thankfully, our workforce team here is incredible, and they see through things, that I would never have caught. And yeah, they have kept our hiring process pretty stringent.
And then Cloudforce has since been recognised by Washington Post for workplace excellence, as mentioned earlier. So congratulations. What did it take to build a company where people generally want to stay and grow?
Yeah, I think um, stay and grow is probably the right words to use because growth is really paramount in that. Um, One of the things that was frustrating for me as an early engineer was I didn't really know what I had to do to get to the next sort of role, to get to the next promotion. It was always opaque. It was never really clear. So one of the things that we did early on was let's make it very clear to everybody that comes in what the expectations are for the current role, but also what the expectations would be for the next role. So everybody here has what we call a professional development path or a PDP. And so it's hyper clear like what you need to do to get the promotion. And it's not necessarily you need to sit in this seat for 3 years in order to be eligible. It's here are the skills, the certifications, the accomplishments that we expect. And as soon as you've cleared those things, whether it's, 3 weeks or 3 months or a year or two, you'll be eligible for promotion. And so I think that has helped people to feel like they know exactly what they need to do to succeed in their career, and they don't need to go somewhere else to get to that next step. I think that's the key thing in tech. Everybody feels like they need to jump ship to make, extra money or to get to the next level of seniority. And that's a common issue in tech. But we try to make it clear that you can do that here and that you don't have to go elsewhere.
And why do you think other companies don't do that? Because I also see that a lot.
It's a lot of work, to be honest. Like, it sounds like such a dumb reason, but the truth is it's just a lot of work for managers to make sure that they are meeting with their teammates regularly to review a professional development path, to update it as necessary, to make sure that they're checking things off as the individual is getting through certain gates and accomplishments. It's work. I mean, it's not an enormous amount of work, but it's just one extra thing that every manager has to do for their team, and so um, that's probably the reason.
Yeah, I suppose if we go back to cutting corners, they're cutting corners by doing that, and then in the end, you lose good talent. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think every hour of time in a business is ultimately money. And so I think it's often a mistake that people think if I spend an extra hour doing this, we're losing money. The truth is that if you don't spend that extra hour and that person quits, you're going to be spending a lot more money than that hour would have cost you on recruiting a new person who's then going to have to try to learn everything that that person that you had already knew. And so I'd rather set aside extra time where our consultants are not billable and our staff have some free flex time to work on these things that ultimately I think save us money.
it makes sense. And then you personally received recognition in the Washington Post for your leadership. So, congratulations on that. What did that mean to you? And then how has it influenced the way you show up as a CEO today?
Awards are great. We've won a lot of awards. The truth is that the awards would be less meaningful if it wasn't reflected in the things that we hear and we see and we feel from our teammates, and from our community and from our customers. Um, the awards are a good way to represent that publicly and help to attract more great people to join the business. But we don't really do it for the awards. I think that my satisfaction comes from seeing our customer satisfaction score stay high, and ours is consistently above a 9 out of 10 every quarter when we do it, which is pretty remarkable. But we also do an employee NPS score, so we actually survey all of our staff consistently throughout the year to understand how they feel about working here and what are the things that they don't like, and are these things that we can address. And I think when they see that, they say, oh, I wish that we had this benefit, or I wish that we could work remotely from Christmas to New Year's. And then we say, okay, everyone can work remotely from Christmas to New Year's. Like, we actually take action on these things regularly when they're reasonable and when they're doable. That helps to keep the score high. And I think our employee NPS score is also super high, which is like, one of those things that is reflected in Glassdoor ratings that you can see publicly, but it's also something that you can feel, walking around the halls here.
Yeah, that's good to hear that it's important to hear from the customers and your employees because they're the ones that really matter. So, but congratulations because you have won so many awards. Okay, so you've worked closely with large, complex organizations from federal government to education and then enterprise. What have been the defining leadership challenges when guiding organizations through transformation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that we talk about a lot now with AI. Everybody wants to understand why their organization is lagging behind, or they feel like their organization is lagging behind their competitors as it relates to using AI to do, whatever it is that they do more effectively. Um, this is not new. I think every time that there is a big technology shift, it takes a while for especially large and complex organizations to catch up. Um, the truth is that it's usually not a technology problem. It's usually more of a people and process. I won't even call it a problem, but more of a hurdle to tackle. Um, People tend to like to do things a certain way, and they get, accustomed to doing things a certain way. And when you try to introduce change, some people are open to change, most are not,
Yeah.
especially, folks that have been in their role for a while. And so I think something that I learned pretty early on was that even if the system is perfect and it does exactly what the business set out for it to do, that doesn't mean that people are going to use it, and it doesn't mean that it's actually going to create any business impact if people don't want to use it. And so we spend a lot of time working on things like change management and training and strategic communications, which are not really technical skills. They're more people skills. Um, but they're hyper important because if you can't get a person to, put hands on keyboard and use something and actually enjoy using it because they realize that they can do something better, faster, stronger, more efficiently, more accurately, whatever it may be, then all of the work and effort that goes into building the most elegant system or product is going to be sort of wasted on them. And so I think that's the thing that most technology leaders ignore or don't really put enough focus on, is building a strong internal change management and training function.
So if you see an environment where they don't have that, or they're not looking to invest in that, would you still want Cloudforce to invest their energy there, or?
I think we're often asked to augment our customers with our, you know, um, organizational change management experts. We've actually built a team to do exactly that over time. And that team has grown significantly in the last 12 months because everybody is looking for this help. I think the truth is that we can't just expect that every customer is going to have that function internally. And so to the degree that we can help, we should, and we try to, but they also have to be open to receiving the help. So the only time we would shy away from working with a customer is if they don't have it and they don't feel like they need it, because then we know the project's going to fail.
Yeah, people think that tech is the silver bullet, and it's not.
No, and AI is not, a magical, magician in a box that's just going to come and fix all your business problems the minute that you introduce it. It actually, to be honest, can create new problems if it's not handled appropriately.
Yeah, and if your data and environment isn't right, it could actually show you more problems that maybe others can't see.
Yeah, it's like a highlighter for all the mistakes that you have made with your data estate for the last however many years you've been in existence. Like every customer is like, the AI is leaking our sensitive data. I'm like, no, you were leaking sensitive data before. You just didn't realize it because the AI makes it obvious.
Definitely exposes. So Cloudforce made a significant shift from consulting into product with Nebula One. So when that sort of happened, like, did you like how did that initially happen?
Yeah, I think I must have tripped and fell on my head because it sounded like such an obvious, simple idea in the beginning. I think so. When ChatGPT first hit the scene and everybody realized, oh, this Gen AI thing is a real thing, pretty quickly we started to recognize patterns in our customers in terms of like what they actually wanted to use Gen AI for and how they wanted to deliver it. We were doing a lot of work for universities, consulting work, and so part of what we wanted to understand from them was, if you could build a system, your dream AI platform for your university, what would it look like? And so I actually did a tour along with a bunch of folks from Microsoft to a number of universities all over the country in 2023. And they all kind of said 80% of the same stuff. They wanted a platform that was secure. They wanted a platform that was flexible with, all of the different large language models. They wanted something that was affordable and something where they could have oversight into what people were doing, just to make sure that they weren't doing things that were reckless or sort of out of compliance with their data standards. So we heard that and we're like, okay, well, we could build this as a one-off project for one customer and it would be pretty significant in terms of its cost. Um, or we could build it as a product internally and just license it out to customers to use at a much lower cost. And so it seemed like an obvious sort of decision to say, okay, we know how to build this thing and there's a clear need and we feel like there would be product market fit if we built it. And in the beginning, it was like, well, let's just build it and give it away for free because customers will love it, and then they'll love us more, and we'll get more consulting work out of it. So that was, part of the initial thought process. But then we pretty quickly realized that um, one, it costs a lot of money to build a product, and that money doesn't, return itself immediately. And two, there's a lot of expectations from customers when you have a product. So it's not just here's the product, here's some training, off you go. You have to have a support function and a customer success function and all these other functions that we didn't really have to have as a consultancy. So there was a lot of learning in that transition.
And when you actually built it, what would you say was the problem you were trying to solve?
I mean, I think there was a number of off-the-shelf tools that our customers all had access to, whether in education or healthcare or otherwise, but none of them were really meeting the need. They were either too expensive, or they were too um, inflexible, or they were uh, concerned about sharing data with some of these companies. And I won't name the companies, but I think we all know who they are. You know, the whole sort of cliche of like, data is the new oil. I think everybody knows that their data is now the most precious thing that the business or the organization has, and so everybody's looking to protect their data more now than ever before. And sharing it with companies that build LLMs is not something that most organizations feel super comfortable with doing. Thankfully, as a Microsoft partner, we have access to the same models in an environment where there is enterprise data protection, and people trust Microsoft not to misuse their data, because their data is there anyways today in SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams, and Exchange, and all these other services. And so it created a unique opportunity for us to deliver something that met the customers where they were and gave them a sense of sort of security and comfort that they could use AI without doing something irresponsible with their data.
And was it hard to build? Because you mentioned that there was other off the shelf products, and for different reasons didn't hit the mark. So was it quite difficult to?
I mean, I can't take any credit for that because I am not the software engineer in the group. So thankfully, I have known our now chief technology officer for over 15 years, and he's the most brilliant software leader that I've ever met. And so I was able to actually convince him to come join the company to work with me to build a product, and this was really his brainchild. Um, I think in the beginning it was more straightforward because AI, 3 years ago, AI was, I show up, I ask a question, I get an answer, I'm happy with it, I copy and paste it, and I move on. I think today it's much more complex with different modalities and different like capabilities and a million different models. And every week there's a new model with a new capability. And so it's very complex today to build the product and maintain the product. Um, but I think in the early days, it was pretty much our CTO and like one or two other people part time that, put it together really quickly and had something that people could see and use and liked. And yeah, so hopefully that answers the question.
No, it does. Thank you. And then for leaders hearing about it for the first time, how do you describe Nebula One in a way that CIOs, CTOs, and university leaders immediately understand?
Yeah, to be honest, the elevator pitch is a difficult one because until they see it, they sometimes don't understand it. And we've sort of created um, almost like a new category of AI platform. The way that we describe it is like an AI gateway that you can connect to any model for any reason, and provide that to every user across your environment on a consumption basis, in a private environment, which is not the best, elevator pitch, but I think when we show them how it actually works and they get hands on and they see a demo, then it makes perfect sense. And they have this aha moment of, oh, I can access, OpenAI's models and on Anthropic's models and Meta's models all in one place and still do the same work that I would do in those systems, but in my own private environment, that I can control, that I can govern, that I can set budgets and limits on. And then they're like, yes, this is exactly what I want because this feels like I'm in control again.
And it sits in the Azure tenant, from my understanding. And what I thought was really cool was that when Cloudflare went down, anyone who was using Nebula One had everything still up and running.
Yeah, so I won't say that Microsoft never has any blips in service. Every company is susceptible to that, but because every instance of the platform runs privately for each organization in their own Azure tenant, we are less susceptible, I think, to some of the outages that have taken down everything from Uber to Starbucks recently. And it also gives folks a little bit more sort of control over how users access these systems, when they can access them, what they look like. So we even have like custom branding for every instance of our platform. So if an institution, for example, wants to, you know, label it as their own, they can label it, they can, you know, color it, they can put their logos on it. We don't really, you know, force our branding on them, and I think that that also creates a sense of ownership. And I think you know, customers really appreciate that.
It's nice because it's bespoke to them and they can tailor it, and then also all the data and everything's kept within, which is very important, especially for universities.
Yeah, 100%. And a lot of our universities are research organizations as well. So it's not just, you know, we need to protect our student data, which is obviously super important, but they also have proprietary research that is incredibly sensitive. And so, you know, that's the last thing that they're willing to share externally.
Yeah, can imagine. And there is a lot of noise around AI right now. How do you separate genuine transformation from hype when deciding to invest your energy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's probably the most difficult thing as it relates to the product and the product roadmap is, you know, what are the things that we need to do? What are the things that we ought to do? And what are the things that we should ignore? And the reality is there's too many things now to do all of it. And we probably shouldn't do it all because users are getting overwhelmed with too many features, too many models, too many things. And I think there is beauty in simplicity. So um, we sometimes take a little bit of a wait and see approach. Like, let's actually see if this new thing that people are hyping up in the news is something that people will actually use and get value out of. And also, I think, you know, watching your own behavior and how you interact with tools is super insightful. And most people don't, I feel like a lot of people don't really think about, like, well, how do I use these tools? And do I find this thing to be useful or relevant? You know, that's not a perfect barometer for what other people would want, but it's a good data point. So if it's not something that you would use, it's probably not something that most people would use, at least if, you know, you're somewhat representative of your user base. So there's a ton of things that we choose not to do, and I think there's a lot of hype right now because everybody wants to be on the AI bandwagon. Every investor wants to pour money into some AI thing that's going to become the next big thing, and so I think a lot of you know, companies are sprouting out of the ground with something that sounds incredible but is not really technically feasible or is not realistic to actually work with the way that the technology has evolved today. And so there's going to be a lot of companies that, you know, come out of the ground and unfortunately probably disappear just as quickly over the next few years. And the key is just being able to really hone in on where the value is. And you know, I think waiting and seeing sometimes is the best way to do that.
And then many organizations believe that Microsoft licenses already give them AI capability. Where does Nebula One actually extend or unlock value beyond the standard Microsoft stack?
I mean, I think that Microsoft has embedded AI capabilities in almost every product at this point. So, you know, whether it's Copilot Chat or M365 Copilot or the 55 other copilots that exist across the entire Microsoft ecosystem, there are great capabilities that any Microsoft customer can use most likely today. Um, what I think is missing is within the Azure ecosystem, there's a lot of services that enterprise customers and very large customers want to use to build things that are more bespoke. And it takes a lot of effort to build those things. Usually, you have to have a team of engineers and experts to spend months or years to build a platform that will be more custom to your specific use cases, your data, your integrations, your users. And you're not going to get that from any off the shelf product, to be honest. Um, and that's really where I think you know, Nebula One fits in. Is we take away probably 80 to 90% of the difficulty of standing up all these services, so that you can focus on, let me just build the use case inside of the platform that already has all the plumbing, that already has all the security, that's already been audited for compliance with GDPR and HIPAA and SOC 2 and all these things that nobody really wants to have to worry about. And I think Microsoft realizes that there's a lot of customers that want to use these super powerful Azure services, but don't necessarily have the staff on hand to build with them.
And I guess early on, maybe there was a choice between sort of Microsoft and maybe AWS or different technologies. Like, what made you pivot towards Microsoft?
Yeah, that was definitely a non-consensus bet when we made it about a decade ago. And so it was pretty early on in the business. I was doing work with Amazon, doing work with Google, Oracle, Microsoft. And there was a couple things about Microsoft that stood out. One, they just had the most mature partner ecosystem and like partner programs. Every big hyperscaler has a partner program, but they're not all built equally. I think Microsoft has invested a lot of time and energy and resources and money over the years to actually really think about how they can support partners long term, and not just we're gonna be your friend today and we're gonna be your competitor tomorrow. So that was one. The other thing is that pretty much every organization on the planet that's been around for a while has a relationship with Microsoft and has had one for a very long time. And that's not the case necessarily with Amazon or Google. Um, I think it was sort of a presumption that everybody was going to go to AWS because they had the early lead. But I think the truth is that they had a really good lead, and they probably still maybe have some lead as it relates to startups and companies that are just getting going and want, scale at a low cost and are willing to sort of start from scratch. But most of our customers are not starting from scratch. They're starting from a place where they have decades of infrastructure and applications and a lot of proprietary Microsoft technology, honestly, that runs their organizations. And so my my non-consensus sort of thesis was that when these big organizations finally decided to move to the cloud, that they would preference Microsoft because all of those services that they've been running on-prem for so many years are just designed better in the Microsoft cloud because they're proprietary and nobody else has that leg up, right? If it's, Active Directory or SQL or Exchange or, the 55 other Microsoft services that most enterprise organizations rely on, they just run better, cheaper, faster in the Microsoft cloud. And you already have that relationship and sort of trust with Microsoft to move workloads there in a way that's not going to require new contracts and new staff and new training and all new things. So
And then speaking of customers, where do you think universities, public sector organizations, and large enterprises most often misunderstand about adopting AI effectively?
that's a loaded question. Um, I think probably the most common misconception is that you can one size fits all with AI. Everybody is looking for the one solution, the one model, the one system to solve all of their problems. And I don't think that there is one for any large, complex organization. I think it's going to be a collection of tools. Just like when the internet was first introduced, there's not one software as a service that's going to solve every organization's problems. You have an ERP, you have a CRM, you have a financial system, you have a human capital management system, and each one of these things is fit for purpose and is probably better at doing one thing than any one system would be at doing everything. And so I think AI is not it's not a one trick pony. It's going to be embedded in every department, in every knowledge domain, and there's going to be certain tools that are just better at doing AI for legal or AI for finance or AI for fill in the blank. Um, so I think it's important to think about, can I cover 80% of my use cases with one platform and then kind of pick and choose the other 20% from things that I can kind of narrowly scope to just one department or one group of people so I can keep the cost controlled. But that's a mistake that I think a lot of people are making right now.
And then you've mentioned that Cloudforce is deeply connected to Prince George's County and then also the wider DC region, which I believe that's where you grew up. What drives your commitment to local hiring, community impact, and then invest in the area that supported your growth?
Yeah, it's funny because as a kid, I actually didn't really like living here. And I thought that as soon as I was an adult and I could leave, I would leave. But early on in consulting, I got to travel quite a bit around the country and see all sorts of different places that I probably wouldn't have seen otherwise. And I realized in that process that DC is actually a great place to live and to work and to run a business. And so it was pretty intentional to start here. Um, I think that there is a wide breadth of resources and support systems and great organizations here to help companies like ours grow. And I don't think that that exists everywhere in the world or even everywhere in this country. And so I do feel like our success is, to some degree, a result of being here and being connected to the organizations that supported us. I also think that it's really easy to complain about the things that are wrong with your city. Everybody has things that they don't like about their city, whether it's transportation or the schools or policing. Everybody has those things that they don't like, and it's really easy to complain about them. But it's I think more difficult to actually do something about it. But as a business owner and an employer, I think there are things that we can do to make things better. And one of those things is hiring locally, because ultimately, if we can create more high-paying jobs here in DC and keep the best talent here and not have them move out west or move to one of the other tech hubs in the country, ultimately those people will stay here. They'll buy houses here. They'll raise families here. They'll contribute to the community here. They'll raise the tax base to help fix the potholes in the roads here, and things will get better over time. It's a long-term bet. It's not going to fix anything overnight, and we're just one, small employer of many. But rather than just complain about what we don't like, I'd rather try to contribute to making it better.
Yeah, that's really nice. The grass isn't always greener, as they say. So
No, no. And I think, there's been times where I've been tempted to look at opening an office in another part of the country where the cost of living is lower or the cost of office space is cheaper. And, when I really dig into what that would take and the amount of traveling back and forth and getting to know a new city with new organizations and new, laws and regulations, it's just like I would rather stay here and pay more for our resources and really build something that feels like one thing, than a bunch of little offices all over the country where it's more convenient.
and if you weren't leading Cloudforce or building AI platforms, what do you think you'd be doing today instead?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as a kid, I wanted to be anything related to like motor racing. So whether that's a driver, a mechanic, a car designer, something in that world. And so, I'm a big F1 fan. I try to travel to races when I can. And if I wasn't doing this, I would want to be doing something in that world. Although, they say you should keep your hobby and not make it your job. So I might not be as passionate about it if I was, working in it, but I think I would be doing something in that world.
What is the best piece of advice you've ever received, and how has it shaped your career or leadership philosophy today?
Yeah, actually, I had a mentor for a number of years who was super impactful in the way that I've sort of led the business and grown the business. And we sort of met by happenstance at a networking event. She was an owner of a consulting firm that she grew from nothing to being a behemoth that was ultimately acquired by one of the largest consultancies in the country. And she taught me a lot of things, but one thing in particular that she always would say is, don't be too stuck on people doing things your way in the business.
Mm-hmm.
People might have a different way of achieving the same result or better. So she would always say, it's got to be my way or better. So if you can show me a better way to do it, by all means, do it that way. But if your way is going to produce a suboptimal result, then you should probably do it my way. And so I think I'm definitely a perfectionist when it comes to our work, and I probably made the mistake of trying to impose my way on people early on. And she helped me to realize that other people often have a better way of doing it, but you have to give them the opportunity to go their way.
Great advice, and I'm sure it's sometimes quite hard to implement.
Well, especially when you see somebody struggling with something and you're like, my way would work. Sometimes you just have to like be patient and let them beat their head against the wall and figure out their own path. But also know when to intervene and say, okay, like we've been at this for weeks. Let's just do it the way that we know is going to work.
And then you spent your life at the intersection of engineering, entrepreneurship, and community impact. What drives you personally when you take on new challenges?
I'm just a hyper competitive person. I think that's in my nature. Like I want to win at everything. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's, business, if it's personal, if it's fitness, if it's anything. Um, even board games with my family. So like I just want to win. I don't know where that comes from. Maybe something in my childhood sparked that, but I feel like I don't want to commit to doing something unless I'm going to like really put all of my effort and focus into doing it correctly. Otherwise, I'm just not going to do it. And so it does mean that I have to be careful about the things that I choose to take on, both professionally and personally. And I also struggle with saying no to things. So that makes it especially hard because I want to do all the things all the time and do them well. But I'm learning over time how to say no to things that don't align, or if I feel like I won't be able to do it well, I need to just say, you know, probably not now.
And do you feel for someone who's achieved so much and been so successful that you enjoy the journey the most than actually getting there, or do you like getting to the success or the end point?
Early on, I liked to get to the end point, and it was really great in consulting because it was projects, and the projects always have a start, middle, and end. And at the end, it's like, all right, I did the thing, it's done. Here you go. I can move on to the next thing. But I think throughout my career, I've definitely evolved into, um, enjoying the journey more and also understanding that there isn't always going to be an end, and that's okay. There isn't always going to be like an aha moment, like here's the thing. And owning now a product is very much that. The product is never done. There's never an end. It's always evolving. It's always changing. It's always growing, and the business is sort of similar. Um, so I've learned to, I won't say stop and smell the roses, but have fun along the way and like enjoy the little moments. We just had our holiday party, um, last week, and we took our entire company on a bunch of limo buses out to a beautiful resort, like 4 hours out into the mountains. And it was like a picturesque, the most like holiday thing you've ever seen because it was actually snowing that day that we got there, and it was just beautiful. And everybody got to spend a few days with their colleagues and their spouses and getting to know them on a personal level. And I think those moments are, what honestly drives me to continue doing this.
Yeah, sounds amazing. It sounds like it was lovely as well. And then looking ahead, what kind of legacy do you hope to leave at Cloudforce with Nebula One and across the broader tech community?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously we want to succeed as a business and succeed as a product, but there are also sort of ancillary benefits to the work that we're doing. One of those benefits is being able to deliver AI capabilities to students that don't go to the best school or don't have, a ton of their parents' money to throw around and buy the most expensive AI tool of the day. I do think that AI is going to level the playing field in a way that no technology before this point has. And I feel a responsibility to, leverage our success to help bring AI to places and to people that might not have had access to it otherwise,
Hmm.
and to sort of create that equity, and enable people to, do things that they might not have been able to do otherwise. I think that in the future, people's success will be far less tied to where they came from, versus what they can do.
I think it's amazing that you're part of leveling the playing field as well and giving everyone the same opportunity.
Yeah, I mean it's not perfect today. We still, have a business to run, and we can't give everything away for free, but we try to deliver things at as low a cost as possible. Most of the users that use our system are costing less than $1 per user per month to the organization that's hosting that system. And that's, pretty incredible if you look at what the cost of most AI platforms are today per user per month.
And you've won Microsoft Education Partner of the Year for 2025, so congratulations. You have such an amazing relationship with Microsoft. I guess for, all the other partners that would be listening, like what are you doing differently? Like how did you build such a good relationship?
It's funny because a lot of people ask that, especially recently with this award. The truth is that Microsoft tells you how to be a good partner, and most people don't listen. And I'm not saying that it's easy. It's actually fairly complex once you get to a certain size, but it's not that complicated in terms of what it takes to be a good partner to Microsoft or to anybody, right? It's really just looking for the opportunities where you can win, they can win, and the customer can win, because those opportunities do exist. Um, it doesn't have to be zero sum. It doesn't have to be, well, if I'm going to win, then Microsoft has to take a haircut or the customer has to, maybe make a compromise. I think you can make everybody happy if you're really intentional about it. So, and also just sometimes you have to give to get, and that's something that we've learned over time. There's been, I can't even tell you how many events or hackathons, charity things that we have sponsored and done it without any expectation of getting anything in return. And ultimately, it's not something that you can quantify to say, okay, we did all these things and now we're partner of the year and we're in the limelight with Microsoft. I think if you do the right things, then people that have the right intentions will see that and they will favor you. And I think Microsoft has a lot of folks there that actually want to do the right thing and do the right thing and appreciate partners that do the right thing as well.
The secret sauce is do the right thing.
Do the right things, and you have to play the game too. Like Microsoft has a lot of hurdles and certifications and cookie points and specializations, and you got to do all those things too. So hire somebody that can manage all that, because if we didn't have an incredible alliance manager, I don't think that we could keep up with all of the changes.
Nice. Well, it sounds like you've built a really good team. And I guess it goes back to your competitiveness that you like to be the best and win. So you guys definitely are doing that. And then finally, are you able to give us any insight or teasers into what's coming next for Cloudforce and Nebula One over the next year or so?
Yeah, so I can talk about a couple things. We did actually seek outside investment for the first time this year, and that was a very challenging and it was a learning process for me. I had never spoken to private equity or venture capitalists before, and I did all the things wrong in the beginning, and I got told no by I don't know how many different investors. But thankfully, we found a couple of investors that see the value of what we're doing and understand sort of the opportunity that we are chasing. And so we're going to be announcing our Series A in the next couple of weeks, hopefully, which is a big deal because it's just going to enable us to do what we're doing faster, bigger, better, with more scale, with more people. Um, and so we'll be doing a ton of hiring going into next year, which is exciting. That's probably the biggest news, but out of that news will come all sorts of other things like new features and new capabilities, new industries that we're going to look to work with and expand in, mainly healthcare. So we did some work in healthcare over 2025. We're really excited about that work, and we want to expand into more like healthcare provider organizations, so mainly hospitals and academic medical centers. Um, and so that's an area where we're going to focus a lot of research and development as well as just growth and marketing efforts next year.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for the insight and congratulations on the funding.
Thank you. It was yeah, it was definitely a moment of humility for me because I'm not used to being told no so many times. But it's good. I learned a lot in the process.
Yeah. Was it hard initially doing that? Because obviously, for such a long time, you haven't accepted funding and you've grown something yourself. And, I can imagine it's your baby. And then having to, I know you want to take it to the next level, but then having to do that must be hard.
I think it's hard, but it's necessary. And the minute I realized it was necessary, it wasn't like, okay, I've got to give up some control or some ownership of the business. It was, I'm bringing in a partner to help us to make what we have bigger and better. And I would rather own a smaller piece of a bigger pie than all of something that stays small. And that's just, that's what you have to do to grow a product. It's not new to us. So
And I guess the last question then, what is there anything that you'd share with other entrepreneurs or companies, partners on the same journey that you were on that they should do to kind of get where you are today?
yeah, I would say if you're just getting started, definitely ask yourself the question of like whether it makes sense for you. I don't
Mhm.
think that this is for everybody, and I don't say that in like a sort of self-serving way. I think that um, you have to make a lot of sacrifices to grow a business. Um, but if you're willing to sacrifice, a personal life and time with friends and time with family and all the things that people enjoy doing outside of work, um, I would say create an environment where you can focus as much of your effort towards the thing that you're trying to build. Be singularly focused on one thing. Don't try to do three businesses at once. That's something I see a lot of people doing is like, oh, well, I have, this, I'm a social media influencer, but I also have this product line and I'm also a DJ. And, I do this other thing off on the side. And, 5 years later, it's still exactly the same. Um, you need to be singularly focused and try to cut as much noise out of your life as possible if you want to move fast. And so I live across the street from our office. I can literally see my condo from pretty much where I'm sitting here. And the reason is because I wanted to spend as little time commuting as humanly possible and as much time in this seat doing the actual work. So I think it's important to try to set your life up in a way where you can focus.
Well, thank you so much for today. I feel really honoured to have you as the first guest on our podcast, and it's been really great speaking to you. And I just want to say congratulations because your journey is inspiring. I firsthand see what you're building in terms of the talent in your team, in terms of culture, people, and what you're delivering for customers. It's brilliant. So you deserve the education partner of the award that you've won.
Well, it's definitely humbling to be even asked to do this. That's not really my strength necessarily. I'm an introvert, as I mentioned. So, like, even doing podcasts or any kind of public speaking is something that I've had to learn over time. But I really appreciate you asking me to be on the show, and happy to come back if your viewers think we did any good today. I'd be happy to come back for a future episode.
Yeah, we'd definitely love to see what's next for Cloudforce in the future. So we'd love to have you back. So thank you so much, Husein.
Absolutely. Thank you for taking the time.
You're welcome. Take care.